So let's talk about what happened when I visited Vietnam. So I've been to Vietnam a couple of times on business and with the M-Vac. And when I was there the first time, I said, you know what, I'm not sure if I'm ever going to be back to Vietnam. While I'm here, I have to go see the Hanoi Hilton. Now, the Hanoi Hilton, I mean, the Hilton is obviously used sarcastically, if at best, but that was a POW camp during Vietnam, and had the whole camp isn't still there. The only thing that's really there are the main buildings that were built, ironically, way before the Vietnam War. So, and amazingly, most people don't know that the Hanoi POW camp, where and it was made famous because Senator John McCain was a POW there in the Hanoi Hilton for 5 years. But there were a lot of other soldiers, but he's kind of the most famous one because he became a U.S. senator and presidential candidate and everything else. So, but the horrors that he describes, along with many others, I was actually able to see kind of where some of those happened. And I'll tell you what, the Hanoi Hilton, just in walking up to the front gate, gives you a feeling of dread and darkness and just evil. And it's still there. You know, we're what, 50, 60 years later, it still feels like that. And it was just, man, how do you describe this? It's kind of dank and dark, and you walk into these front areas, and obviously it's a prison, so it has to have really thick doors and lots of gates and maze almost that you have to go through. But as you start the tour, one of the first places you go to is kind of the barracks of where a lot of the soldiers that were over the POWs lived, and then there was an outer wall. And this outer wall, the thing that was most striking to me about it wasn't necessarily the height. I don't know, it looked like maybe 10 feet tall. But on the top of it was all this crushed glass, like lots of broken glass bottles and things that were cemented into the top of it. So if you ever, and then there was lots of concertina wire and stuff on top of that. So even if some of these POWs had ever gotten the strength to escape their wherever they were being held, even if it was just a bamboo hut, that alone would have taken a lot of energy and a lot of noise. So to be able to do that and then get to one of these walls, they would have some means of climbing over this without being literally cut to shreds by these glass bottles. And the feeling of hopelessness that I felt. Now, I mean, again, this is just a tour, but the feeling of hopelessness that I felt just from looking at that wall was incredible. And so I can imagine how bad it would have been to actually know that you were a POW there, and you have no idea. I knew that within an hour or two, I was going to leave that place and I was going to go back to my life there. Well, and back to business and be able to go back to my hotel room and hot tub and whatever else I was doing that day. Well, the feeling of hopelessness that occurred just with that wall, and then you go into this other building, and I think that was one of the original buildings. So let me backtrack a little bit. So again, most people don't know that the Vietnamese people and the soldiers did not build the Hanoi Hilton to keep American soldiers during the Vietnam War. It was actually built by the French when they were I guess Vietnam was a colony of France way back when, and they had built this prison for people that wouldn't be controlled by the French government. And so it was literally kind of like a torture area for compliance. And again, that refers back to the weak leadership. When you literally have to torture people in order to get compliance, then, that's a problem. So after the wall, you go into this big room, and how do you describe it? It's probably maybe 100 feet, 80 feet long, and say 30, 40 feet wide. And along both sides are these areas that are basically, I don't know, probably 6 feet wide. And at the bottom, more toward the center of each of these. And again, if you're watching the video, then I'm going to be putting in a bunch of pictures and things like this, so you'll get a better idea. So definitely go visit the video if you get a chance, and subscribe, by the way. Hopefully it'll be interesting enough to you, and anticipate future videos, because they're coming. But they shackled the prisoners by their ankles all along the inside portion of this bed, and they were about every foot, it seemed, so they could cram a ton of people in, prisoners in this. And what would happen is they would just lock down one ankle. So one ankle would be locked down, but that would allow the prisoner at least to roll over on their side, and so they could sit there long term. And then at the very end of the room was like these stools, and it was over kind of a slanted area that was the latrine. And so when the prisoners needed to relieve themselves, they would just go, and it was just kind of an open latrine, in front of everybody. I mean, I'm sure as a POW, they knew each other enough that, nobody really cared. But the bottom line is there was zero dignity to this place. And also they were crammed in there together. And so I'm sure, especially in the hot Vietnam summers, they were just, it was just unbearably hot in there. They're probably, sweating, all crammed in there. The body heat that they're all putting off is just keeping the room even hotter. And I just absolutely miserable experience. But at least in that room, they only had one ankle locked down so that you could roll over on one side or another. And there was enough room that they could lay down. Unless you're like 7 feet tall, you could probably lay down and be able to sleep some. Well,
all the day long, all the night long, they were allowed to get out 3 times every day, just for exercise, for food, and for shower. And in the 3 times given by the French, they got to use the 2 toilets. You see that? They put toilets inside this room, so it was smelly all the time. In winters, it was very cold. They closed, or they opened all windows. And in summers, it was very hot and humid. They closed them all. Yeah. And same also, my here they got one left in the train, but me and the other one, got 2, because he was considered a very dangerous terrorist under the French might. But for Vietnamese people, he was a hero. He were on different sides of life. Now you can take photos of that.
Leave some. Well, from there, so that was kind of the main room. And then from there were these little isolation area, really small, a lot smaller rooms that they obviously used for problem prisoners. And then there was one room in particular that this room was absolutely incredible. And whoever thought this up, I swear, has to be burning in hell, because that person's mind has to be so warped to think about this. So let me try to describe this room. It's a relatively small, it's like a almost like a rectangle type room, where it was maybe 6-8 feet wide, and it was about, I want to say 5 feet, maybe 4.5, 5 feet deep. Okay. So even somebody short would still suffer in this room. Now, the reason I say that is because it was actually slanted this way. So the door's right here. And so imagine the doors in the front, and then the place where the prisoner would be, again, it had these ankle shackles right really close to the door. And then rather than a flat area, it actually sloped down. And so if you were put into this room and both your ankles were shackled, that was a key. Both ankles were shackled down. So you were locked in, basically. I'm sure there were some ways that you could adjust, but it was kind of a double whammy. With both ankles locked in, it would be really hard to roll over onto one side or another. Also, the room was shallow enough that even if you were to lay back, first of all, you're laying back with your head down. So all the blood is going to rush to your head. And then the room is short enough that if you were laying down, your head would hit the back of the wall, so that I think even a prisoner that was maybe 5 feet tall, they would not be able to lay their head down completely. And if I'm 6'1", and I kind of got in there a little bit, and I'll tell you what, probably from my shoulders up would have been against this wall. And so I would have, if I were to ever be put into one of those, which I'm sure lots of American men were, during the Vietnam War, and who knows, maybe John McCain was. But the bottom line is, there's no way you could ever get comfortable enough to probably sleep at all in that room, because you're laying down, the blood's rushing to your head, and even if you were able to kind of roll over onto your side, anyway, it's just the torture. It's a simple room, but the torture of that room would be just so incredible. It's just hard to fathom how you could, again, how do you do something like that to another human being? You have to look at them as if they're not even human, because they're like worse than a dog. And it's just, again, it's difficult for me to understand, very difficult for me to explain. And this is just bringing up all sorts of memories. It's just absolutely incredible. But okay, so from there, we actually go into the torture and like the execution room. And then in there were all sorts of machines, including a guillotine. And so there, you got the French. So when the French abandoned this prison, they obviously left a lot of these torture devices that they had conjured up. And, I mean, it's not like the Spanish Inquisition or anything like that, where you have racks and things, but there were some there, there were a number of kind of like torture tables and, spikes and things like that. And so I'm sure they were able to inflict a lot of pain on people. And I'm sure, like, John McCain was never able to raise his shoulders or raise his arms above his shoulder level. And that was all because, they had literally broken his shoulders. And I'm sure, I'm not sure of anything, but it very well could have happened in that room, and that torture room. So that was kind of all in one building. And yeah, what a wonderful, glorious place. Then it kind of went into different ways that through the ages, and both Vietnamese and American POWs had tried to escape this prison. So, but as a whole, I also toured the Vietnam Memorial building there, which was probably some of the most amazing propaganda I've ever seen. Where the communists, when they took over Vietnam, clearly they wanted to make it so that the American aggressor, and that was the entire cause of the entire war. So, but that was fairly depressing as well. But just going through that prison was just staggering, and so it gave me a little bit of a perspective of, I'm sure, what some of the Holocaust was like. Other than killing 6 million of the Jewish people, there was an amazing amount of torture and all sorts of issues going on there as well. And that's, again, how you reach that level of evil is through, for normal people that are not like serial killer crazy types. It has to take such an amazing amount of propaganda and mind shifting and coercion, all sorts of evil ways to manipulate people in order to think that they are actually doing something that is justified, is just absolutely incredible. So how does all of this affect us today? And where does this relate really with all things crime? Well, if you think about the manipulation that Hitler was doing, at the same time, the appeasement that Chamberlain and other world leaders were doing, that creates kind of the perfect storm to enable and this, if you've listened to some of my previous episodes, this is kind of the third level of evil that I'm talking about here. Well, if you look at some of the things that's happening, there are a number of parallels that are happening today at this very minute. And again, this is why history is so important, is because we see things that happens. We see the outcome of some of these actions that initially appear, not innocent, but they're not so nefarious that they require, war type things, but they establish the conditions. When two countries have people that disagree to such a magnitude that it requires actions, that's called war. Well, that same thing is happening within our country. People are being pitted against other people. There's and they're using all sorts of different ways to do that. They're using race, they're using vaccine. It's like I heard there's a poll that said that one side of the poll said 40% of the people polled thought that it would be okay to put unvaccinated citizens in a separate, almost like not necessarily a concentration camp, but kind of a separate area to keep it away from the rest of society. I'm sorry, that is crazy to even think that, especially in light of a lot of the things that we know right now. And what your vaccination status is, and what where your thought process is with the current, the virus and all that stuff doesn't matter. The bottom line is, if you have ever reached a point in your mind that it's okay to take normal citizens and put them into concentration camps, it's the same mentality as what we went through when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. We started putting Japanese American citizens in these camps, and a lot of them were as patriot as you and I, and yet we were putting them in these camps. And folks, we have to wake up. We cannot continue down this path. The level of crime and the level of violence, today in New York City, the NYPD was mourning the loss of a 22-year-old officer. And if you see on the news, you see pictures of just thousands and thousands of police officers honoring their fallen brother, and it just melts your heart. But one of the primary things during the service was the widow of this young officer that was murdered, and he wasn't just murdered. I mean, he wasn't just killed. He was responding to, on a call. He was responding to a domestic dispute, from what I understand, and he was immediately fired on. This guy had a Glock pistol with a 50-round drum, and you have to be pretty serious about your business to have a 50-round drum on a semi-automatic pistol. And the body cams showed that this officer wasn't just shot. Once he was down, this guy continued shooting at him and his partner and killed them both. And this officer died at the scene, and his partner died a couple days later. And it's just, the entire story is tragic. But the widow of this officer absolutely tore into some of the politicians that were in attendance that had set the conditions that allowed this to happen. This guy should have never been on the street, let alone be able to own a weapon or be in possession of a weapon. And because this guy had a rap sheet, 30 miles long, and but he should have never been out of prison. That's the key to it. And the people that are willing to conduct violence are the ones that have nothing to lose. And if these guys are out on bail and they're going to be heading to prison anyway, then conducting more crime, what's the difference? They're going to be headed off to prison for the rest of their life. So whatever crime they commit, it's not going to make any difference. So the conditions are ripe, and folks, we got to wake up. We have got to remember our history, and we've got to remember how we get to the end stage of where the real heartache really happens, and where it becomes Holocaust level. We have to nix the conditions that allow that stuff to happen. And we do not want gang violence, just open war on our streets. We can't have it. So we have to start protecting those that are hired to protect us, and that's our law enforcement. So that's my message for today. Hope you guys enjoy it. And like I said before, definitely go to the YouTube channel and subscribe and give me some feedback on what you think. Talk to you later.